I'm going to make some larger pieces of work with this slab that I've rolled out. This slab's made of crank clay, and crank clay is good for making larger pieces of work, slab built work. But the drawback of it is that the colour of it when it's fired is a sort of pink colour, so I'm painting over the surface of the slab with a slip that I've made of the normal clay body that I would use, and this gives a better, whiter background for colours that I'm going to apply over the top. While the slab's still flat, I'm going to add some texture into the surface of the clay. And to make the texture, I'm using this grog that I'm making myself. This is a piece of clay body that's dried out, and I'm grinding it up, and I can sprinkle this into the surface of the slab while it's still soft. I make quite a few grogs myself by using different clay bodies that I grind up or different ceramic materials that are ground up. I also buy in grogs as well, molokite grogs, and I can find geological samples too and grind them up and sprinkle them into the surface. I begin adding the texture by painting a bit of ongob onto the surface, and this will help the grog to stick to the clay. I have to think about the form that I'm aiming to make, and I need to have an awareness of where I want the texture to be on that form and how I'm going to cut this slab up to make that form. And the texture's applied by sprinkling the grog onto the surface of the clay, and then I'm going to use a rolling pin to embed it into the surface. Most of the marks that I make on my work are done once the piece has been constructed, but this texture really has to be done while the clay is still flat. Because I'm going to use a rolling pin on the surface, that couldn't be done once the piece has been constructed. And the texture that I produce may end up being quite prominent in the piece that I make, or it may be covered up with other ceramic materials and be more subtle and become more of a sort of background texture. I want this surface to evoke a feeling of some of the textures that you might see in the landscape that I live in. It could represent something about the beach landscape or the rock formations, or perhaps even some of the textures and colours that you see in the fields.